to do his research. I mean, some things are really rough. But he was helping them measure what was happening, and the quantity of the mollusks was slowly but surely going up, 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 because by having a reserve like that, they were able to really maintain things over time. So if we go back to those variables I talked about, we have actors. When you think about Kino, Penasco, and Seri, we had slow growth in Seri. This wasn't the indigenous community that did not have a lot of people coming in and out. Penasco, very rapid, and Kino, very rapid. But then when we go to local leadership, we had none in Kino. There were just so many people, and nothing, no one person or one group really took charge and tried. Had good leadership, and Seri had good leadership, buildings, social capital, and social organization. Lacking in Kino, high, high. And when you go to shared knowledge, low in Kino, high, high. Technology is the same. So some of the variables were just plain controlled across. When you go to the governance system, there wasn't one in terms of formal property rights. Kino had none, Penasco had none, Seri had them, because they were granted formal property rights as a member, as an indigenous community. When you go to operational rules, they were mostly present across all three, but monitoring and sanctioning mostly absent in Kino, but mostly present in Penasco and Seri. And so if we look down the columns, when we do large N, we do statistical analysis. Here I use this for presentation so you can see the differences overtly between the three cases and really understand how they were similar and how they differed. In terms of successful organizations, no. You just look at the comparison up and down that column with the other two. Yes and yes. And so we had quite a difference in the dependent variable, self-organization, and in the variables we were positing as jointly affecting whether or not they would self-organize. So we had two that were self-organized, Penasco way up there, and Seri. As you can see, they were similar on most variables. I'm not going to go through all of the little comments I have here since I just did it. But most of the important things like trust and reciprocity, local leadership, etc. were missing. If we look at Kino Bay, this is a picture that Javier took, and look at the boat. At any one time, it would be not too unusual to have 70 plus boats. And so this is a picture of an open access fishery. And if you've read about open access and had never seen it, there it is. Now if you look in comparison at the Seri village, in the Seri village at any one time, you would find a few boats out like this that are out right now. At the time of the picture, there are 5. And at any one point, you might have up to 10, but you would not have a large number of boats like you have in Kino. So it just gives you a pictorial view of the two. Now, 2 of the SESs have a chance of being robust over time because they self-organize. That's step 1. If you don't self-organize, you're not going to be robust. But is self-organization by itself sufficient? No. The reserve in Penasco was so successful, it attracted fishermen from all over Mexico, and probably some from the U.S., who would come up there, and they didn't used to fish up there, Why would you go all that distance? But after they had the reserve that was generating a wonderful supply of fish, other fishermen heard about it and started to travel up there. And finally, the local fishermen said, after asking the Mexican government several times to help them and give them some support, and they said, no, you don't have the right to do this, as many people don't have the right to protect local resources, and I think in some places in China you will find that problem. The Mexican government gave them no support, and finally the fishermen said, heck, probably a stronger word than that. If everyone else is going to come up and fish our fish, we're going to fish. And so they went in and fished out and got as much money out of it as they could, and that was the end of the fishery. So self-organization is important, but without some backing, you are missing some problems. And in terms of the design principles in governing the commons, some were missing. So let's ask which were absent. Well, boundaries of actors and resources are clear, more or less. A congruence between benefits and costs, more or less, not too bad. Actors had procedures for making their own rules. They could monitor. They could engage in graduated sanctions locally, and they did. But there were no rights recognized by the government. Thus, they had no regular conflict resolution mechanisms, and there was no nested of those institutions and others. So at least 3 of the principles that I developed long ago were missing. So what we're now planning to be doing, and have started, is over time research in multiple sites to assess what combination of these variables that we've been struggling with in the identification of the framework are associated with good ecological conditions and the resilience of those over time. And we've been focusing primarily on small and medium-sized common pool resources, trying to take on the globe. One, they're not more than one. And 2, it's a big problem to study, but we've been identifying attributes of forests, water, fisheries, and studying these rigorously. And let's look at some initial findings from forestry. One of the surprising findings that is now very well supported in large N statistical analysis is that one of the factors that is most related to whether a forest continues to regenerate and be in good condition or degenerates is that the users themselves monitor each other and what's going on in the forest. This has not been in our literature. I hope we can change that. There are a very large number of studies that have looked at monitoring strategies now going back some time. 3 very recent ones. A very good article by Eric Coleman in JPAM. Coleman and Seed have one in Ecological Economics. Chautre and Agrawal in the Proceedings of the National Academy of 2009. They have actually 2, one in 2008, one in 2009. But why it's important that there are multiple studies is we've been checking on the research, being sure that we can interpret it in a good way. If we look at 100 forests in 14 countries with data that we have collected with the International Forestry Resources and Institutions Program, which contains data in the SES framework, Coleman and Steed found that when local user groups have a right to harvest something from a forest, they're more likely to engage in monitoring and sanctioning of each other. That means they have a long-term interest. If you have no right at all to harvest, then why would you pay any attention to what's going on? And in fact, you have some orientation if a big truck comes along and the truck driver offers you some green paper or whatever, but money, to not report them for stealing timber, the temptation for most users is to accept it. So the problems of illegal harvesting when people have no rights. Now their rights may be to non-timber forest products or some specific forest product. Doesn't always have to be the timber, but there've got to be some rights. This is counterintuitive to some people. They want to take all the rights of indigenous and local people away. Don't let them harvest. And yet they have to have some real say in what is going on and some real long-term payoff, and getting goods, products from the forest is one of them, and then they monitor each other. Over time study in 46 forests in 6 different countries done by Eric Coleman, sorry. He measured the basal area and Shannon index, for those of you who are biologists, in a random sample of forest plots. When the local users monitor, both of the ecological measures are sustained or improved over time, controlling for social economic status. Forests that allow users to harvest. Again, I'm saying this repeatedly because I want you to get this big, important message. Then it's not just public officials who monitor occasionally, who come once a month and look around, but people are in and out of the forest all the time. So we don't find any statistical difference between just private property, community property, and government property. When we just take a big sample and look at those 3 kinds of property rights. But what rules are in place does make a difference. A recent analysis of 80 forests in 10 tropical countries looked at the trade-offs and synergies between level of carbon storage and contribution to livelihood. And again, people said, oh, don't let the people harvest. That'll take away the biodiversity. That'll take away the carbon storage. And yet they found that in many forests there was a synergy between the two, and that these are not always counterproductive. Again, keeping local users out of a forest is not a way of keeping this thing going forever. It's not a panacea. So there's a lot of future work that we need to be doing. Now we're working with colleagues all over the world and at IU, developing clear definitions of key terms to have a common interdisciplinary language. We have definitions, but we're going to really work on them hard. Keep this as a foundation for a lot more theoretical application, trying to study more social ecological systems over time, and examining which propositions actually work, where and when. So there's lots of work for the future, and your ideas and your suggestions will be appreciated.